Good morning and welcome. There's a moment most of us know well, though we might not have named it. It's the moment when something happens, a word someone says, a situation that doesn't go the way we planned, a relationship that pushes exactly the wrong buttons. And before we've even had a conscious thought, we've already reacted. We've spoken or shut down or given our peace away to something outside of ourselves. That moment and what we do with it is where the sixth of the 12 powers lives. Charles Fillmore associated the power of strength with Andrew and the power of power itself with Philip. Today, we're in the territory of power, and more specifically, what Fillmore called dominion, not power over anything or anyone outside of yourself, dominion over the one territory that's always been yours and only yours, yourself. This is the power of self-mastery, and it begins not in what you do, but in what you choose. The throat is the physical center associated with this power, and that connection is worth sitting with for a moment. The throat is where inner life becomes outer word. It's the bridge between what you know inside and what you declare into the world. But before anything true can come through that bridge, something has to be settled on the inner side of it. Mastery begins within. The voice that carries authority is always rooted in something deeper than the throat itself. Philip is an interesting choice for this power. In the Gospels, he's often the disciple who asks the practical questions, who wants to know how things will actually work. When Jesus talks about feeding the 5,000, Philip immediately does the math and points out the impossibility. When Greeks come seeking Jesus, Philip doesn't presume to bring them directly, but goes to Andrew first. There's a caution in Philip, a hesitation that looks like it might be the opposite of power, but Fillmore saw something else. He saw someone learning that real power isn't presumption. It's the capacity to speak and act from a settled interior knowing. And that kind of knowing takes time to develop. Philip's journey is the journey from hesitation born of insecurity to restraint born of wisdom. That's the maturation of power. That's what we're learning to cultivate. So let's start there, in the interior. Most of us were never taught that we have a choice in how we respond to life. We were taught implicitly or explicitly that feelings just happen, that reactions are automatic, that if someone does something hurtful, the hurt is inevitable and the reaction is justified. And while feelings are real and valid, there is a space, sometimes a very small space, between what happens to you and what you do with it. Viktor Frankl, writing from the most unimaginable circumstances, called that space the last of human freedom. In that space lives your power. Self-mastery is the practice of finding that space and widening it. It isn't about suppressing what you feel. It isn't about performing calm while turmoil runs underneath. Real mastery doesn't push anything down. It creates enough interior room that you can feel what you feel and still choose how to respond. You can be hurt and yet speak with dignity. You can be afraid and still take the right next step. You can disagree and still remain in your own integrity. That's not weakness. That is the most demanding spiritual practice there is. And it is a practice. The space between stimulus and response doesn't widen by accident. It widens through repetition, through the daily, unglamorous work of noticing when you're about to react and pausing long enough to let something else become possible. Sometimes the pause is only a breath. Sometimes it's a day. Sometimes it's the decision to not send the email you've already written, to not say the things that you're sitting with or that are on the tip of your tongue, to not make the choice that would feel immediately satisfying but wouldn't serve who you're becoming. Every time you choose the pause, the space gets a little wider. Every time you choose your response instead of your default reaction, you're building the interior capacity that makes real power possible. This isn't about becoming a different person. It's about becoming more fully yourself. The self that isn't at the mercy of every external circumstance. The self that can remain steady even when the ground is shaking. Charles taught that every one of the 12 powers is a spiritual faculty, a capacity of the soul that can be developed. Power and dominion aren't things you either have or don't have. They're capacities that you cultivate. And like any capacity, they grow through practice. Through the repeated choice to come back to yourself when the world pulls you out of yourself. The world will always be pulling. That's not going to change. What changes is your relationship to the pull. There's a particular kind of waiting that keeps us from mastery, and it's worth naming directly. It's the waiting for conditions to be right before we step into our own authority. Waiting until we feel more confident, waiting until we have more experience, more credentials, more external validation, waiting until someone recognizes what we're capable of before we act like we're capable of it. This waiting feels like humility. It often isn't. It's the avoidance of the one risk that matters most, the risk of showing up fully as who you are before you have anyone's permission to do so. And here's what that waiting costs. It costs you years of your life spent in roles that don't fit you, in conversations where you don't say what's true, in relationships where you're performing a version of yourself that someone else can tolerate rather than being the person you actually are. It costs you the contributions that you could have made, the leadership you could have offered, the truth you could have spoken that might have changed something for someone else. False humility looks safe. It isn't. It's slow erosion of the self, the gradual disappearance of your own voice, the quiet grief of a life half lived. Real humility knows you're a work in progress and show up anyway. Real humility says, I don't have to have all the answers, and I'm still the person who needs to step up into this moment. That's power and dominion. That's the refusal to wait for permission that was never going to come from outside of you anyway. Interior authority doesn't wait for permission. That's actually the defining characteristic of it. It isn't bestowed by someone else's recognition. It isn't created by a title or a role or an achievement. It rises from the settled knowing that you are a divine being, that God lives in you and moves through you, and that the wisdom available to you in any given moment is real and trustworthy and yours. Charles Fillmore wrote that the power center in the throat region is the faculty through which we give expression to our ideals. That's a striking way to put it. Not just our thoughts or feelings, but our ideals, the things we actually believe to be true and good and worth standing for. When mastery is established within, the voice that emerges isn't loud for the sake of being heard. It isn't forceful for the sake of winning. It speaks because truth requires expression, because integrity eventually has to be said out loud, because the divine in us will not forever consent to be silent. This is what it means to reclaim your voice. For many of us, voice was the first thing we learned to manage. We learned early which truths were welcome and which weren't. We learned to soften, to qualify, to frame things carefully so as to not disturb. We learned to swallow what was real and offer something more palatable instead. And we became so practiced at this, we stopped noticing we were doing it. The editing happens so fast that we don't even hear the original thought anymore. We don't notice the moment when we translate "I disagree" into "I hear what you're saying, but maybe we could also consider." We don't catch ourselves turning "No, that doesn't work for me" into "Well, if it's easier for everyone else, I can probably make it work." The self-centering has become automatic, invisible, woven into the way we speak and think and present ourselves to the world. And the cost of that is profound, because every time you edit yourself, before you even said what's true, you teach yourself that your truth isn't worth hearing. You teach yourself that other people's comfort matters more than your integrity. You teach yourself that your voice, your real voice, is something to be managed rather than trusted. Reclaiming your voice means catching those moments and making a different choice. It means saying the things that's actually true, even when it would be easier to say something softer. It also means trusting that your perspective has value, even when it's not popular. It means letting go of the exhausting work of managing how you're received and simply being honest. Reclaiming your voice isn't about becoming louder or more demanding. It's about becoming more honest. It's about letting what is true in you find its way into your words without the elaborate editing process that strips out everything that might make someone uncomfortable. True power speaks truth, not to wound, not to win, but because truth is the substance of the divine, and speaking it is an act of spiritual integrity. And here's what's worth understanding about the relationship between inner mastery and outer voice. When the voice is rooted in genuine interior authority, it doesn't need to be defended. It doesn't need to be repeated at increasing volume. It doesn't need others to agree with it to remain true. A person who speaks from real mastery can say what is true, remain steady when it's challenged, and release the need to control how it lands. That is spiritual authority, and it serves. It doesn't control. The difference between authority that serves and authority that controls is exactly this. One is rooted in inner mastery, and one is still trying to establish it through external means. When we're genuinely settled in ourselves, we don't need others to comply in order to feel powerful. We're already powerful. The response of others becomes interesting rather than essential. Authority that serves looks like this: offering your perspective clearly without needing it to be adopted, setting a boundary without requiring the other person to understand it, leading without diminishing the autonomy of those you're leading. It's the power that makes space rather than taking it. The kind of strength that empowers rather than overpowers. You can feel the difference in a room when someone is speaking from that kind of authority. There's no performance, there's no posturing. There's just a person who knows what they know, who trusts their own clarity, and who doesn't need you to agree in order to remain certain. That certainty isn't arrogance, it's the natural result of cultivated self-mastery. And it serves everyone it touches because it gives others permission to find their own authority rather than borrowing someone else's. This is the freedom that mastery offers. Not freedom from challenge or difficulty, but freedom from the exhausting project of managing how you appear, controlling how others respond, and waiting for the world to confirm what you already are. And here's what becomes possible when you've claimed your own authority. You stop needing to diminish anyone else's. This is where personal mastery becomes collective gift. Because when you're no longer scrambling for power, when you're no longer trying to establish your authority by undermining someone else's, you become free to see other people's power as something that adds to the whole rather than something that threatens your position. Insecurity makes us competitive. Mastery makes us generous. When you know who you are, when you're settled in your own divine authority, you can celebrate someone else's clarity without feeling diminished by it. You can step back and let someone else lead without feeling like you've lost something. You're able to acknowledge when someone else is right without experiencing it as defeat. This is rare. Most of us have been so conditioned to see power as a limited resource that we treat every interaction like a zero-sum game. If you're powerful, I must be less powerful. If you're right, I must be wrong. If you're shining, I must be dimmed. But divine power doesn't work that way. It multiplies. It expands. The more each person steps into their own genuine authority, the more power becomes available to everyone. And the person who has done their interior work, the person who has cultivated real self-mastery, is the person who can see this clearly and act accordingly. They become the one who calls forth power in others, who makes space for voices that have been silenced, who recognizes divine authority wherever it shows up and honors it. That's leadership. That's spiritual maturity. That's what it looks like when dominion over yourself becomes service to the whole. You are already the authority of your own life. The practice is learning to live from that truth rather than towards it. So let's take a moment now and we'll transition to our meditation, and we'll go within and let that idea settle into something real. So go ahead and find a comfortable position. Take a nice deep breath to relax. And another one, and release it fully. And as you relax, go ahead and close your eyes if you're comfortable with that. If not, just soften your gaze. And take in another breath. And this time, as you exhale, let go of anything you've been carrying that isn't yours to carry right now. Bring your awareness to your throat, not with any effort, just a soft attention. This is the place where your inner life meets the outer world, where what is true in you finds its way into words. Ask yourself gently, where in my life have I been waiting for permission to speak, to act, to step into my own authority? Just notice what arises. Don't judge it. Just notice. And now ask, what would I say or do or be if I were fully settled in the truth that God lives in me and my authority is real? And again, let whatever wants to come, come. And imagine a word, a sense of something that has been waiting. Whatever it is, receive it without analyzing it. And in just a moment, we're going to enter a minute of silence and just be with whatever came and let mastery speak to you from the inside out. And as we prepare to come back from the silence, you can bring with you what came to you in meditation, or you can leave it knowing that it's always within you and you can return it anytime. So when you're ready, take another deep breath, let it out, and just bring your awareness back to the ground beneath you, the room or your surroundings. And when you're ready, if you've closed them, open your eyes. The power, some have been waiting to claim, it's been yours all along. Not because you earned it or because someone granted it, but because you are a divine being and divine authority is your birthright. What changes isn't the reality of that power. What changes is your willingness to trust it and to act from it. To let it guide how you speak and move and show up in the world. Self-mastery doesn't make you harder, it makes you freer. Free to feel deeply without being controlled by what you feel. Free to speak truthfully without needing to manage the response. Free to lead without diminishing. Free to step back without disappearing. Free to be exactly who you are, in full possession of your own voice, your own choices, and your own divine authority. It begins within. It has always begun within. And every time you choose your response instead of your reaction, every time you speak from truth instead of fear, you show up as the authority of your own life. You're practicing the sixth power of the 12 powers, the power of power itself. You're building the interior foundation that makes everything else possible. Mastery begins within, and it's already yours. And so it is. Thank you.